Ever since Australia's contemporary progressive wave started making impacts on society, there have been continually growing calls from the political left to change the date for Australia Day. Australia Day, also described as Invasion Day by the progressive establishment, has been argued as a day of mourning, and that a date that there should be no celebrations. In contrast, Australia's conservative circles have argued the Aboriginal history is Australian history, and that the nation is moving closer towards racial division and anti-Australian rhetoric. In today's video, we're going to unpack the complex situation that is Australia Day, why it's become such a big issue, and the potential solutions to this problem. Australia Day is our national day, which marks the anniversary of Captain Arthur Phillip and the First Fleet establishing themselves in Sydney Cove in 1788, after relocating from Botany Bay to find a more suitable settlement. The actual concept of Australia Day, unlike United States Independence Day, wasn't as straightforward, and it took time for it to take the form we're familiar with today. In short, the amalgamation of region-specific celebrations and a greater urge from national unity led to the date being chosen for January 26. Lawmakers emphasised the cultural and historical significance of the landing, and the beginning of what would be Australia's nation. Throughout the 20th century, historical analysis saw the revelation of systemic corruption, discrimination and neglect against the original native inhabitants of the country, which would foster eventual changes within the nation. It's probably worth mentioning the Change the Date movement isn't a new thing. The movement dates back to the Day of Mourning in 1938, which was the first official public protest from Indigenous Australians. Public advocacy for this issue gained further momentum as Coalition and Labor governments gradually began granting rights to First Nation Australians. Meanwhile, progressive movements established themselves at universities and key sectors in society. The contemporary Change the Date movement has been advocated by left-wing progressives due to it being significant with Aboriginal history, with it marking the beginning of colonisation, land dispossession, cultural destruction, and so-called intergenerational trauma. The movement is comprised of both moderates and more radical supporters. The moderates generally want to change the contents of the day to show greater respect to the Aboriginal community, while involving greater inclusivity and promoting multiculturalism. Advocates such as Noel Pearson have acknowledged the complexity of the matter, and rather than changing the date, proposes a three narratives approach, involving Aboriginal heritage, British establishment, and the modern migrant story all wound together. The radicals, on the other hand, wish to more drastic measures, such as changing or abolishing the day altogether, and a restructuring of Australia's political, social and economic systems. Most of Australia's socialist, Greens and some Aboriginal organisations have lobbied for more intense measures, with the addition of a treaty, complete overhaul of the day, and greater recognition of land rights being some of their points raised. The impacts of the protest and expansive recognition of First Nations people in recent times has resulted in a visible shift in Australia, with supermarkets such as Woolworths, pubs and restaurant chains, and even the Victorian state government cancelling Australia Day at some point. These changes have prompted responses from Australia's moderate right and conservatives. The right moderates argue cultural and historical importance of Australia Day, and argue that there's been some amount of overreach and division driven by the progressive establishment. They also believe Australia Day is merely symbolic, and that resolving issues regarding First Nations people should be practical, not symbolic such as changing a day. The Conservatives, on the other hand, denounce so-called wokeness and racial division that they believe has been driven by radicals such as the Greens and Socialists. To the Conservatives, the removal of Australia Day has been seen as anti-Australian and harmful to the concept of Australian nationhood. Conservatives have also highlighted things such as positive discrimination and identity politics, which they believe to be key drivers of division. Regardless of what side you fall on, it's clear that this has been an ever-growing and more controversial issue, especially as the days tick over to January 26 this year. Although, despite all this, it might be worth looking at some potential solutions to this issue. Firstly, we could see a referendum on the date change. This approach would see a democratic process take place for Australians to determine if Australia Day should remain. Although, due to the failure of the Voice to Parliament referendum in 2023 and growing unpopularity for the Albanese government, it's unlikely that a referendum will be held. Combine this with over 69% of Australians supporting Australia Day, according to the IPA, and it's clear that this theoretical referendum is unlikely to go ahead, and if it does, it's likely to score a similar no vote, or if not, outperform the Voice to Parliament referendum. Another option could simply be that support for the date change withers, as the failure of the Voice referendum and overall conservative shift in the Western world could mean that Australia Day may potentially be left unchanged. In addition, the progressive establishment is not able to find an alternative date that most people agree on, with at least 4 in most general discussions. A last but possible option is a reform to the day to further include groups such as First Nation and the modern migrant community, to celebrate Australia's unique cultural differences and communities. But with all this in mind, it's definitely not going to be an easy road to find some sort of resolution and try and make all people happy. Despite whatever happens before, on or after Australia Day, a future government of Australia in this election year could suggest where the nation is heading regarding social issues. So we'll be sure to revisit this topic at some stage after the election. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed our content, consider subscribing and ringing the bell so you can keep in the loop with all the important news stories from the world and around Australia. We're also proud to announce that we've just released our 4th edition of the Snapshots newsletter. This edition highlights significant global headlines, as well as major news from Australia and beyond. You can access it down below in the link in our description. Lastly, I'd like to thank our regular supporters and the team for making this video possible. Your support is crucial, and if you'd like to help, consider buying us a coffee, our merchandise, or purchasing a premium membership. Your support would be crucial in the expansion of our platform, and any contributions invested will go directly into our equipment and operational costs. Once again, I'm Heath Clark, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.